Welcome back to the September 2024 edition of NMRAx. Our first presenter has enjoyed modeling specific prototype railroads and locations for 20 years, just a fraction of the time since becoming a model railroader in the early 1970s. His interests are focused on railroads, industry, and the urban environment of the mid 1920s. He's very thankful for the encouragement and inspiration from many hobbyists over the years. Please welcome world famous Eric Hansman.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Speed. It's great to be here to another fun filled NMRAx video event. And today we will talk about weathering as layers. How many of you here weather your models? I know it's a silly question to ask because I can't see any hands, but that's how it goes. I'd like to start off describing what can happen out there in the elements to various prototypes. I'd like to start with some definitions. For instance, exactly what is weathering? I feel it's what we attempt to imitate with multiple layers of deposits, whether it's paint failure, paint fade, and more. And as we consider what can happen to prototype freight cars or structures, we must adjust our methods to imitate these multiple layers of deposits. And over the years, I've found there's one way that I go about this, and it's mainly because it's not a one-step process. Different layers require actions through the process, and that's what we're going to talk about. From natural to man-made elements, these are all what I keep in mind when I weather a model. Tools and materials are varied, and they've been noted in many weathering features in the hobby press. I'm sure you've read some of them about washes, pan pastels, various chalks. I remember way back in the late 70s, using artist chalk, articles about that. I like to start off using acrylic paint for my washes. Note the colors here. That's from on the left is parchment, and we have a gray, raw umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, and I also use burnt umber, which is missing from the photograph. All these colors are in the earth tones range because weathering isn't green or blue. Let's face it. It ranges right around these earthy colors. I also avoid using straight black or white anymore. I used to, but I realized that that's not that common out there in the real world. I use black or white to make a color darker, a darker shade, or to lighten it as a tint. A color wheel is a great tool to understand this too. Pan pastel weathering kits are also available. These come with a tray and with application tools such as Pan Pastel's soft tools. This kit is a range of grays. And another set includes earth colors of earth tones. When using these, make sure you keep the applicators color specific. If you need to mix colors, scrape some off of the main color onto a plastic palette and then add the lighter or darker color to get the shade that you want. Then you can mix those together with a microbrush. Um, I bought these 6, 7 years ago, and I haven't run out of anything. They've been a great investment, and they last a long, long time. What I find important is to establish a process. Set up a good workspace so you can weather a few cars at a time. I prefer to weather one, 2 or 3 cars at a time. I don't like doing one at a time anymore because once I get going, I just want to do several. With acrylics, I use distilled water mixed with a drop of dish detergent to help the liquid flow. It's basically wet water, right? We want to we want capillary action to flow well, so we reduce the tension in the water, similar to what we use for ballasting. Some people use alcohol, isopropyl alcohol. I'm very wary of that because I used it once to weather, and I saw the paint just kind of fall off the car. A lot of the current paints can be removed with isopropyl alcohol, so I've used that very sparingly around freight cars. If you use an oil-based paint, consider odorless terpenoid as your thinner and cleanup solution. And also, the AK Interactive products are another possibility. I just haven't gotten fully involved with those products yet. And, in most of these cases, um, I work on the car side from top to bottom. Remember gravity. Gravity brings things down the car side, not necessarily up. Now, for some examples. These are from several years ago. I used oil paints on this one. Note how the rivet panels are highlighted by the dark wash. Let's see if I can make the pointer. There we go, laser pointer. The rivet panels here are darker. That's where dirt and grime would collect. Um, the blotchy areas in between, I used basically dry brushed with a smaller brush and less of a wash. Pan pastels, raw umber pan pastels I use in the corners, and a light gray color pencil was used to add chalk marks like this one here and a couple here. I also like adding scuff marks going up and down the ladder rungs too. Here's another example. I actually applied two washes to this car, and this can be tricky. As I learned very quickly, the second wash can literally wash away most of your first application. So if you're going to do two washes, um, either use two different types of paint, acrylic and oil, or vice versa, or spray on a flat coat between washes. And after that flat coat dries, then you can add the second wash. I've been using Model Master clear flat lacquer in a rattle can. Uh, I've basically come to that because dull coat, I ruined models with dull coat. The nozzle just wasn't working well for me. And now I need to find a replacement for Model Master since it's no longer manufactured. So the weathering here is mostly washes. We've got some pan pastel added. Again, the gray color pencil was used for chalk marks and the scuff marks above the ladder rungs. Don't forget to do the trucks too. I often paint these with a rattle can and then weather them um, as during the weathering process. I often add extra details to models, ready to run and kit built models. And one thing I found is that weathering is the great leveler. Here's an example with the ribside car, and I've added different grab irons, bracket grab irons here than what was with the kit. I also added a wire sill step on all the corners, and on the end there a uncoupling lever. So this is basically how it looks after I've added the extra bits. I also changed the car number here. I brushed on some gloss and changed the number. And I also brushed here because I want to change some of the weigh data too. So this is after a wash has been applied and also some pan pastels. Compare here now where the touched up areas were compared to, ta-da, when it was first done. The weathering has basically blended everything right in. Uh, Pan pastels, I usually use a raw umber uh, down below for dust. Also, you can see here how I've got a paint out and new decals applied for the weigh data. Now, this is a pretty simple question. We usually see the roofs of freight cars, don't we? That's what we see the most. So we need to spend some extra time and attention on some of the details here. Paint failure on the panels, the steel panels of the roof, and also on the individual running boards, like you see here, is very common. Sometimes the running boards were replaced and weren't repainted, like this dark gray one here, or this light gray one here. If this was repaired at a off road, um, a lot of railroads didn't want to pay for someone else to do that work. They would pay to do the board, but they wouldn't pay for the paint. Yeah, railroads were pretty cheap like that. I use the gray splotchiness here was applied with a micro brush, very light gray paint. I rolled it and daubed it onto the car panels here on the car roof. While the different board colors, I used a very um, fine tipped brush or a micro brush in order to paint the individual boards a different color. A steady hand, and you can do this really well. I use the same technique on these models, and then I scrubbed pan pastel neutral gray extra dark color to represent soot. On model 1926, it's very dirty then. There's a lot of soot in the air in major cities all around. You could just barely see some of the different board colors on this one and on this car here. And of course, the splotchiness still comes through from the soot colors. One important thing that we can easily do is save prototype photos that really make make your eyes pop. And this is one of my favorites. It's a Jack Delano photograph from Chicago in 1943, and it gives us a really good view of freight car roofs at this time. This is from the Library of Congress online galleries. They're an amazing resource. It's a very simple web address, loc.gov. Now, I've adjusted this photo a little bit. We can actually zoom in a little bit and see exactly what I'm talking about. On this Penzi boxcar down here, we see some different color running boards, even on the laterals here too. We see lots of soot on the roof of this car. There's lots on this car too. We've got a lot of paint failure on the different panels on this Rock Island boxcar back here. And we see some different coloring on the running boards, individual running boards too. This Milwaukee car, we see some faded paint on the running boards and some different coloring too. And yes, this is still a wood roof on this Milwaukee car. That's why it's lacking the laterals. This car here has a combination of paint fade and wear on the running board, as well as paint failure on the individual roof panels too. So there's a lot there in many of these photos that can inspire you. I've learned to pay attention to the nuances of time and place. 1926 is very different in many ways compared to the post World War II years into the 60s and the 70s. This is another one of those great 1940s color images that you can download through the Library of Congress website to guide your weathering work. As a recommendation, always choose the largest size file to download. It's most likely a TIFF file. It's huge. Might even take a little while to download, but it's worth it in the long run. So I've collected a bunch like this. And while I model 1926 before the advent of color film, I can still learn a lot about weathering looking at these early color photos from the early 40s. Now, initial downloads are going to look like this. They're going to need some work in a graphics program to tweak them, to lighten the overall image. You got to adjust levels, exposure maybe contrast and brightness. And that's what I did with this image. This is also a really good image to argue over the color, the real color of boxcar red. There isn't just one shade of boxcar red here. And this is great to zoom in again and take a look, a little closer look at just how grimy everything is. Here's another rule of thumb for me. Pennsylvania cars, always weathered. Always weathered. That's all I ever see. I think I've seen two new, spanking new Pennsy cars in the steam era in all my hobby time. What's also neat here is the Virginian hopper. That's white lettering. So's this. So's this. So's the Santa Fe Cross back here. Uh, there's a lot of fade in white lettering, and this may be from coal dust, and soot from traveling too. So this is a great photo to be able to zoom in and take a deeper look for inspiration for your weathering efforts. And again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of prototype photos to guide your weathering work. And this is also key. Nothing remains unweathered. Here we go. Nothing remains unweathered for a long span of time. Even a new car within 6 months will pick up a decent amount of dust, even in the 60s and 70s compared to the steam era. They'll pick up a decent amount of dust in a short amount of time. Black and white photos can also offer inspiration. And this is one of my favorites. You can easily crop this so we can take a good look um, and zoom in. Again, power of the computer here. We see some fresh way data stencils here compared to the road name, the number, and some of the other lettering. There's some chalk marks on this car here and here. Chalk marks are important for cars being classified in a yard. It's not graffiti necessarily. It was notes for the yard crews so these cars got to the right track. I also find this interesting. This is a USRA single sheet boxcar. It was originally lettered for the Pennsylvania lines, and they have blanked out lines because in 1924 the Pennsylvania Railroad reorganized and brought everything under the one name, the Pennsylvania Railroad. So anything labeled, anything lettered for the Pennsylvania lines, it got this treatment. They didn't repaint the whole car, they didn't re-letter the whole car, they just blanked out lines. And this was done recently too. Again, the way the latest way stencil is down below on the sill, done in October 1925. We can hardly see anything else here, but yet that stands out. It's just another neat thing that you can find as you look deeper onto some prototype photographs. Now, here's what I did to capture that appearance on a Tichy HO scale boxcar kit. I applied Tamiya tape over some areas of the car so that after I weather the car, when I peel the tape off, it's fresh paint. I also covered some of the decals down along the sill for the weigh data down here so that when the tape comes off, it's got a fresh look. So, also on this car, I used some different gray shades in order to highlight different boards to give them a slightly different appearance. Because wood weathers, and each board weathers a little differently from many others. So after all the weathering layers were applied and I took the tape off, this is the final look. This is the appearance that I wanted to achieve, where we have a little bit of new paint here, where lines was painted out, a couple new boards painted on the door, the brighter uh, way stencils down along the sill. I also had scraps of paper that represent route cards that are often applied to cars, again, by crew in order to move the car along in yards. And this is part of a placard here high up on the door. Moving along. This is the same model. It's a before and after shot. The top one is right after I have sprayed a gloss coat to seal the decals on the C&O automobile boxcar. Um, then what I do after the gloss coat is dry, I spray on a tinted flat coat. The flat coat's important as a first step in weathering, so it gives tooth for everything else to stay well. And I tint it a bit in order to cut the brightness of the white lettering and also to give the original paint more of a chalky, faded appearance. My next step is color pencils, some gray color pencils, some darker here, some lighter here and there in order to give some variation to the wood sheathing. This car was built, I believe, in 23, so I don't want to do a whole lot of weathering effort to it um, because my modeling moment is 1926. So it would be weathered, just not as intensely as some other cars, not as intensely as the USRA car that we saw previously, which was built in 1919. So moving right along, the car ends. Almost every freight car has wheel splash going up the car ends. And I apply this with a micro brush using a very light gray or a very light tan color. Remember, ballast has a bunch of dust in it, so it's going to kick up when it's dry, when it's wet, and leave deposits on the car ends. In this photo, I have applied burnt umber, no, not burnt umber, raw umber as dust along the sill of the car, and the my soot color along the roof and the top portion of the car. I I do my trucks too. A lot of cars in this era, the trucks were painted the same color as the car. I usually start out putting a primer coat on the trucks after they've been washed, and then the car color goes on, and then they get the same kind of weathering as the rest of the car. And I also paint my wheel sets. I've got usually two trays of wheel sets, all painted, ready to go on the next model. So it is ready to go, ready to hit the rails when we get to this time. Now, I didn't take any photos when I worked on the C&O car roof. This is a different model, but here I am applying some splotches with a micro brush. I've already altered the appearance of some of the running boards here on the roof with color pencil. I use Prismacolor pencils. They have a range of warm and cool grays, and that's mainly what I use for a lot of this. Then I aggressively work the soot color into all the nooks and crannies on the roof. I try to tuck in underneath the running board a bit um, so that the soot is pretty even all the way across there. And notice the splotches, you can still see them through the soot on the roof. Now after the pan pastel layers, I use a light gray Prismacolor pencil to highlight detail edges. This is kind of like dry brushing. You can see a line here, and along several different detail elements on this model. And close up, it does look cartoonish. But from a distance, when you're 2 feet away from a car, 3 feet away from a car, as it's on the layout, it just helps the detail pop out a little bit. And here's pretty much our finished C&O automobile car. And again, Prismacolor pencil for the chalk marks, and I use small scraps of paper for route cards and remnants of those cards. Um, I apply those using a small dot of canopy glue applied with a pin. And then when I pick up the paper scrap, I use a wood toothpick. I wet the end of the toothpick, basically stab the small piece of paper and pick it up and put it on the glue dot. And it stays right there. These remnants are typically found on both sides of the car and often in different places. Steel cars, of course, would be different. There is a small wood panel, usually on the door, for the route cards, and a larger panel uh, on the door toward the upper half for placards. Back to a prototype photo. Here we are on the Lackawanna, 1926. This is a great photo to see what was actually done. We've got some chalk marks here. We've got a route card here. We've got some remnants of route cards. Notice the placard board on the steel car end. We see a lot of placard tacks that are left behind. They don't pull it all off. They just grab the paper thing and pull off what they can, and leave what's the remnants there. This one's got a fresh placard and a couple more chalk marks too. But this is the type of photo that I use for inspiration when weathering my models. And I like to weather in varying degrees. I don't go all out and weather everything really quite heavily. Just like the C&O car, I consider when the prototype was built as compared to my 1926 modeling moment. And these B&O boxcars here were built in 1923, and I didn't really want, a well-worn appearance. It's going to be sooty. Let's go back in time and remember what was powered by coal. Yes. Steam locomotives. Yes. Home furnaces. Yes. Most industry. Yes. Especially before World War II. So you have soot literally everywhere in many big cities. So that's something to remember when you are doing weathering on your freight cars. Now, this car here, the placard, I actually have words on it. And I followed some prototype wording that I made these up in a publishing program and printed them out. But when you do this, it's important. You need to set some cut lines so that you can cut these placards to approximate prototype size so they look good and proper on your models. You can fit quite a bit onto a regular sheet of paper. And I print onto a buff color sheet as well as newsprint. Try to stay away from white. Most likely it would weather anyway out in the elements. It was most likely a cover stock, not quite a chipboard that they used for a lot of these placards. Here's another model. This is Pennsylvania Railroad X-23 class boxcar. They built 7,000, more than 7,000 of these cars in the 1912 to 1915 span. And many were refreshed just before World War I, but they would still look weary by 1926. One thing I've noticed about these cars and the prototype photos is that the wood weathers differently from the steel. And that's what I tried to convey here, where the steel parts are a little darker than the wood elements. And I did this using a pin wash. And that's basically using a very fine tip brush, dipping it into your wash solution, which in this case, I think I used Vallejo per number wash, which is very thin, and then just touching the pinpoint of the tip of the brush to some of the metal elements and letting that liquid solution just flow along the metal. That's what I did here on the door and all these other elements. And it sounds like it takes a long time, but once you get going on this, you'll get a car side done just like that. It really goes quickly, and I really like how it looks in the long run. Here's the prototype photo, one of the prototype photos that inspired my work on that X-23. And notice the metal elements all look different from the wood sheathing. Also notice, let me zoom in a little bit here on this one. This has been freshly painted just in this square in order to re-stencil the road name, the car number, and the weigh data. Freshly re-stenciled on a paint out area. This shows up more than you think, and it's very common in steel cars of the 60s and 70s where you see a paint out and fresh stencil. So it's something to pay attention to. You'll start seeing it more and more in prototype photos as you go through different collections. This also has a nice route tag right here above the right truck. Some nice chalk marks too. We see a few scuff marks going up the on the sheathing behind the ladder. Look how rusty this door is. Again, the metal uh, paint of that period in the teens, they didn't realize that paint on metal and paint on wood should be kind of different formulations. So they just used the same paint for the whole car. And in many cases, the paint didn't stick well to the metal parts of the car. Paint formulations changed over time. That's another aspect to think about um, as we weather paint and weather our models. Oops, went backwards. Wrong key. Moving ahead, gondolas and hoppers took more of a beating in general use. This is a Finero and Camerlengo resin kit, and I on this one I added board lines on the interior pieces because they weren't there in the castings. I also dug through in a couple areas where the boards have worn away. I also scalloped the top edge using a wire wheel in a Dremel outside. Um, and remember, when you do this, don't do where the steel posts are, okay? Because that's the spot where the wood would not wear away as easily as it would between the side stakes. I also followed the prototype photo. It must have been the other side where I left off one of the stake stake brackets. Here's the prototype again. Stake bracket is missing here. These little things, these are fun to model. They really are. It just gives your model a little bit more character. And when you're following a photograph and you nail it at the end, it's a really good feeling. Really good. So yeah, just pay attention and follow the prototype. Let it be your guide. Interiors of cars need extra attention. These open top cars where you can see right down in them, you got to watch that. And the colors, it's not just one straight color. It's a variation of tone, a variation of color. That what is what you want to represent here. Now the floors of these were separate castings, and I painted and weathered them separately from the overall car. And what's neat with a wood floor is that after you put a base coat on of gray or light tan for wood, I kind of set it on edge and then took my brush along this side and let gravity pull the wash down across the floor. Let that dry, and then I did the other side, until I was satisfied with how it looked. And then I used dirt from my backyard, real fine dirt, just got it at my fingertip, and just rubbed it down the center of the car here in order to give it a dirty, dusty look. Oftentimes you'll find, some deposits of debris or dirt or coal, in the corners of these gonds too. So, just pay attention to this, take your time with it, and you'll wind up with a really, really good looking model. So, in summary, it's important to establish some methods. Find your comfort level. Don't just do one model and call it quits. Don't. Do another. Do two at a time. Do a couple more in 3 or 4 days or in the next week. Don't wait 6 months to weather another model. You may have forgotten completely about your experience weathering what you did. So it's important to keep up that muscle memory with what you did, with the materials, how they acted, and your comfort level too. So keep that in mind. And weathering, again, is a constant out there in the real world. Work to make your models reflect the effects by working in layers, okay? Dirt is your friend. There's a lot you can do to weather a car to make it look like it's traveled a few thousand miles across the U.S. And most importantly, get motivated, do it. Get your hands dirty. You might mess up, but it's not the end of the world. Find some old Blue Box or AccuRail cars or Tyco or A&M, AHM, and I know you guys have a few of those. And play around with these, play around with color and media. Get to know how this stuff works. You're never too old to start learning new tricks. And these materials go a very long way for the investment. The more you do, the better off you are. Let's close things out with a few more examples here. Now, I added remnants on this car of a paper door seal on wood sheath cars. This was actually fairly popular, where heavy craft paper would cover the entire door, and these battens would be used to keep the paper in place because the load inside may have been something, may have been food related, may have been loose bulk flour, which happens a lot. It may have been something that didn't need soot contaminating coming through the door, the cracks in the door, and contaminating things. And this was very easy to do. I used very thin uh, brown paper bag paper and 1 by 2 strips of strip wood. A little canopy glue affixes the pieces into place. This is Speedwitch Media resin kit, Pear Marquette automobile boxcar. Again, this is a prototype built just a few years before my modeling time, so I didn't want to go real heavy with the weathering. Um, there's some dust on it, there's chalk marks, there's some soot, because I believe in soot. It's got to be there in the steam era, and just enough on there to convey that appearance that it's been back and forth to Michigan several times. Prototype photo here, a pair of Penzi Gons. I believe these are GSD class Gons on the Wheeling and Lake Erie. This is another fine photo to zoom in and take a little closer look at. Notice how the panels they've got different levels of dust accumulation on them. There's some. It's hard to tell if there's rust, but we know the coloration is varied all across this car. Um, the light makes it look like the side stakes are deeper than they are. That's just shadow. But again, you can apply a pin wash to those to make those pop out a little bit. Above the left truck here, we also have a route tag, a route card affixed to the little placard board there. And notice you can barely read some of the smaller lettering, but still way the way data presentation, the road name, and the car number stand out. This one's neat too, a little blurrier. We see some inside color variation too on both these cars, and that's very important for Gons because these things took a beating. These were the pickup trucks of the railroad back in the day, and they took most any load. Wrong way. Um, Getting back to a model. There we have a pair of images of the same model. Again, the top image is from right after it was decaled, right after I think right after the flat coat on this one, and then the lower image is after it was weathered. So we've got pan pastel, we've got some pin wash on the side stakes. You also see the light gray Prismacolor pencil used for highlights here along the sill and along the side stakes. There's a few chalk marks on this too. Another thing I do, this is uh, another route. This is a route card board over here above the right truck. Notice up here it's the car color, down here it's gray. I've noticed in many photos that those boards, the color doesn't stick long because they've been tacked into so many times that the paint fails on it quickly. So they quickly go to gray or just just barely any car color on it. So that's another easy detail to do, whether you're dry brushing on a little gray onto the placard board or the route card board, or just painting it gray like I did here. Here's the gondola end. We've got dust and highlights and chalk marks here on the end. Yeah, chalk marks will show up on the car ends too. So, feel free to put them there. And again, I just freehand these based upon what I see, simple marks I see on freight car photos. Again, we have wheel splash going up both sides. It's a little more difficult on the B end here because, we have so many other details, but if you're careful, it'll show up well. And then the interior, these things hold coal. So this is seeing quite a few trips out of the mines that the L&N served. Another prototype photo from the early 20s. This is a B&O hopper. Um, what do you see here, huh? You barely see the road name. The number, I couldn't read the number here. I had to zoom in on the car end to figure out the car number, actually. But what we see fairly clearly, we see the way stencils because there have been paint outs and new stenciling put on top. Same with the cubic capacity here. We also have a route card tag right here. We've got some chalk marks here too. So this is very simple, and it can inspire you to move forward with on a model. This is a Bowser hopper, and I've upgraded it with wire grab irons, but most of the lettering here is from the factory. I added this fresher looking lettering here. These were decals made by a friend of mine, and basically I installed them and then covered them with tape. After the weathering, the tape came off. The patch there looked pretty new. Car interiors. Hopper interiors are a mix of rust and dirt and remains from recent loads. Um, what I do is I start this by spraying a flat brown with a rattle can through a simple mask that I made with the cereal box side. I cut a rectangular area out of the cereal box that's a little smaller than the hopper opening here. Then I just hold it over the hopper and I spray it with the rattle can real quick to get a different color in there. Then I add pan pastels and I hit some of the highlights with the light gray color pencil too. Makes a big difference. Another prototype photo from the Steamtown collection. This is Newark, New Jersey in 1921. And these hoppers have been through it, haven't they? Take a look. Let's jump in here. I like this one. It's a former Pennsylvania Lines car. The lines has been painted out, just like I showed you earlier. We've got a new way stencil down at the bottom here. We can hardly read Pennsylvania or the car number. We got a metal patch here too. Moving left, we see a car that's still lettered Pennsylvania lines. Nice chalk mark in the middle of it. We still have PL for the reporting remarks on the car end. Note this car end, it's now PRR. It's been changed from PL to PRR. Looking down the row here, every single Penzi car here is weathered. Every single one. Some of them pretty nasty. And that's how it is with hoppers. You've got to really, a clean hopper. I rarely see photos of clean hoppers on the prototypes. And it's this photo that has inspired my weathering work on a couple more hoppers. Um, this is an AccuRail car with factory applied lettering. And what I did here is I added the paint patch in order to put on um, updated way stencil decals. I also did the same thing with the repack over here above the right truck. One thing I see on prototype photos sometimes, a crew member has gone over the car number with chalk in order to make it stand out a little bit more. And that's what I did here with the Prismacolor light gray color pencil. And again, I hit a lot of the edges with the pencil in order to highlight those and bring them out. Here's a Bowser car Again, factory painted. I did change the weigh information here. That's an updated decal, um, and also the repack stencil here. I added a route card right there too. So in the end, what we want to do is we want our fleet to follow a prototype appearance with variations of weathering intensity. That way, things really start to fall into place and look like a real scene. Now, in this scene here, there is one car, well, two cars, three cars now that I look at it, that hasn't been weathered. Yeah, you probably noticed the Union hopper here hasn't been weathered because I'm not done with it. The reefer back here and the tank car beside it haven't been weathered, but everything else has to one degree or another. So get to it. Get your hands dirty. Get weathering. Practice, practice, practice. Do two or three at a time and learn how this stuff works. I think you'll enjoy it. And I thank you for your time. Are there any questions?
There are quite a few.
Quite a few. Oh my
Quite a few.
gosh. Can't
Let's
believe it.
let's do the tough one first.
Oh,
Why pan pastels as opposed to paint pigment powders?
they stick. Pan pastels stick to my models.
Okay,
There's some sort of binding agent in pan pastels that keeps the stuff on the models.
cool. Do you spray a flat coat to seal the weathering?
I do not. I do not. I used to do that, and I saw 80% of the weathering disappear. And then I noticed that the pan pastels, after handling, they stayed on the model. So I do not spray a flat coat to seal the deal. I do not feel it's necessary. You're welcome to do so, but I think you'll be disappointed when you see a lot of your work just disappear.
Okay, what do you use as a thinner for weathering washes?
For the acrylics, I use distilled water. I keep it simple, distilled water and maybe a drop of Dawn dishwashing detergent. It just cuts the tension, makes things flow. Sometimes I'll use the paint thinner, but a lot of the times I just use distilled water with the drop of detergent.
And then the next question might be related to it, or it was for something else in the clinic, but they ask, have you tried diluted screen wash fluid? That's car window wash fluid. It contains alcohol and detergent in water, works for me with acrylics.
Yes, I have. I don't like the smell, and again, I'm concerned about the alcohol melting away the base coat of the paint.
Okay. Then, how does the depicted location and time of the year affect your weathering strategy? Like rainy season, end of the dry summer. Do you care about that?
Mm, no, not as much. Not really as much. My current layout is set in Wheeling, West Virginia in 26, and my next one's going to be set in Pittsburgh in 1926. Both are very industrial areas, lots of soot. Um, sometimes I think with some Western cars, Santa Fe, SP, I might do more dust. There'll be some soot, but not nearly as much as like the Penzi car in the lower left of the photo here.
Okay. What do you use for rust?
Um, I don't really do much with Rust, actually. If anything, I might use some acrylic paint. Very might just do a like a dry brush with acrylic paint. But anymore, um, you know, I see more grime in in some areas, like the side stakes, the hoppers and gons, than rust.
Okay. And
Now,
then,
rust also has different forms too. There's newer rust, which is bright color. There's older rust. The interiors of the hoppers, you know, they could represent old rust.
mhm.
Because I feel older rust is more brown than anything. So that's where the flat brown paint comes in as that first first hit on the interior of the open top cars.
And then there was a question, how can we get a dusty look, like dirt, sand, coal, etc., while making sure the weathering adheres permanently?
Again, the pan pastel products that I've been using have been sticking to my models very well. Most of the models you see here, all the models that were in the presentation, they've been packed up several times to go to railroad prototype modeler meets, unpacked there, put on display, packed away again, transport at home, unpacked again. There's been a lot of handling. They're used in operating sessions too. And I don't see much of the stuff disappearing off these cars.
Cool. And then the final big question. How much time does it take to weather one car?
Um, well, the Penzi car in the lower left there, that takes a little more time because I'm doing the pin wash too. Uh, the B&O car that I showed earlier that was newer, that took less time because I wasn't adding as much to it. I try to do similar layers to every car, um, but it all depends what mood I'm into and what how many other cars are also in process. But as far as time, I don't know. If I boil it down, maybe 20, 25 minutes per car after the
Okay.
flat coat dries, after I can get working on it.
And if you were to change to another scale, like N scale or S scale or O scale, would you do anything different? More
No.
detail, less detail, different
Well,
materials?
larger scale, I'll be able to do more detail, especially on the placards. It'd be easier to put some additional lettering on those.
Mhm.
But no, I probably wouldn't do anything different based upon scale.
Okay. Well, Eric, thank you very, very much. That was very uh, enlightening um, about me getting ready to weather a car. So I'm gonna have to watch this 3 more times and see that works for me.
Now,
And
you're
then
not going to just weather one. You're going to do three at a time, right?
I only have one.
You only have one car to weather?
The others are all flat cars. You didn't weather any flat cars.
Same as the decks for the gondolas. You could do that. You could do that. You need
Well,
dust along the sill of a flat car.
I was gonna try with one. I didn't know I had to try with three. But if you say
Well,
three, then we go three.
break out some old Aurora N scale stuff and weather
Okay,
those.
I will do. So, thank you very, very much, and we will see you next time.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Welcome back to the September edition of NMRA X in 2024. Our next presenter is a member of the Gateway Division of the NMRA in St. Louis, Missouri, where he serves as the chairman of the Achievement Program. His railroad is the Baden, Bucht, and De Smet, a 250 square foot freelance layout in HO. He received the AP certificates of electrical engineering, author, and volunteer, having taught over 60 live and virtual clinics since COVID. He also has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, a master's degree in computer science, and particularly enjoys creating model railroad structures using 3D printing. Please welcome Dave Ackman.
Thank you, Speed. I'm glad to be with everybody today and talk a little bit about what I've been doing lately with regard to 3D printing structures for model railroads. This is going to be a lot of fun. The way I do my clinics is I pre record them to videos so that I don't screw up nearly as much as if I try to freelance this, make it wing it. So we're going to watch a video now for about 42